I don't know why I've had Ali, are you okay stuck in my head. Was somebody playing that earlier or something? Or did somebody ask someone if they're okay? Anyway, this week on the Eldritch Lorecast, Dael is muted.
I don't remember what the question was.
Talking about the Playtest 5 survey results.
Oh, God, I don't know.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah, that's fair.
Everyone has been so hyped about it that it has made me hyped about it.
You know who else is excited about this? Hasbro. Text my group and say, hey, everybody free this Friday to play. There's always someone saying, no, I can't.
Do you think that Baldur's Gate 3 will be more profitable for them than Honor Among Thieves?
You need to see it in play. You need to see how it adds to the game or detracts from the game.
We're talking about Daggerheart now?
Daggerheart.
Yes.
All that and more right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast in all the spheres. That's right. This is the OG flavor of Lorecast. My name is Ben Byrne. If you've never listened to an episode before, I am here joined, as always, by Dael Kingsmill, James Hake, Shawn Merwin. And Shawn, speaking of regulars to this podcast, Gethin has a question for you, which is, with Daggerheart being a 2d12 system, Infinity, the role-playing game by Modiphius, is a 2d20 system. What two dice are you using for your 2dx system if you were to create one?
If I'm creating whole cloth, I'm using a 2d6 system, but not in the same way that, say, a Powered by the Apocalypse game uses them. I'm using the simplest dice I can that everyone will have, and I will make this game very simple to understand by just rolling those two dice and doing something fun but simple with them. I'm not going to tell you what, though, because it's a secret.
There's a bigger conversation than a podcast opener. I think I agree. 2d6 is probably where I would go as well, but with some adjustments. James Hake, what about yourself?
It's so hard to pick a 2D whatever system that hasn't been taken already, right? Like Shawn said, 2d6, Powered by the Apocalypse, 2d12, Daggerheart, 2d20, Modiphius, 2d10, World of Darkness, which leaves me with only two options, 2d8 or 2d4. And I have to say, Caltrops the RPG is looking mighty appealing right about now.
I believe that leaves me with 2d8, which is fine because I think the d8s are the most magical dice shape. So I feel like I could do something with that. I also, in the midst of this conversation, feel like there's something in a Pass the Pigs based RPG system. You ever play Pass the Pigs? You got two little, You got two little pigs and you roll them like dice, and then depending on how they land, you get points. But I feel like there's an RPG in there somewhere.
I think I did have that as a kid. They're like little rubbery, little pigs.
Yeah.
What you've all missed is the 2d2 system. Just flip a coin, 2 coins. Success or fail. There you go. Anyway. Speaking of news, there's a lot of it this week. Speaking of things that people like, Baldur's Gate 3 has launched on PC, and lots of folk are talking about it. I'm not holding my breath for an answer to this question. Have any of us played it?
I have it downloaded and installed and ready to go, but I literally got my microphone set up like 5 seconds before I joined the call for this stream. So I'm kind of waiting to stream playing it just because I feel like that would be fun to do with the community, but I'm so ready.
I cannot wait to play this game. So many friends are saying such good things about it. I was not interested up until about a month before release, and the hype train hit, and I've like my pupils dilated. I'm building a new PC for this game, basically. I'm not buying a PS5. I'm not buying anything current gen. I'm happy with my Nintendo Switch and like a PC that can play everything else, basically. I want handheld on the go and something to play like Baldur's Gate and Elden Ring and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was similar. I didn't have a huge amount of interest in this game until more recently for pure personal taste reasons, that I'm not a huge fan of like isometric tactical RPGs specifically, because I just feel so divorced from the action. I don't feel connected to my character in the way that the game wants me to feel, because, I kind of want to be down over the shoulder Kratos style, feeling the viscera of tearing things apart with my frosty axe and bare hands. But Dante, he's been playing it in early access since well before it was released more recently, and he's done nothing but play it since getting back from the States. So he's really excited. The community is absolutely loving this game at the moment. Shawn, have you taken up the keyboard and mouse?
I have not. I am cursing that it is good and popular, because now when I text my group and say, hey, everybody free this Friday to play, there's always someone saying, no, I can't. And I'll be like, okay, well, how about a board game, or how about some other RPG? And they're like, well, we could just play Baldur's Gate 3. And the last thing I want to do after spending 12-hour days on my screen is to go back to my screen for another 3 hours of a game, which I'm sure is going to be wonderful. And I'm sure when Baldur's Gate 4 comes out, I will start playing Baldur's Gate 3, because that's how I generally work. I'm playing Tears of the Breath of the Wild right now, so that's how I roll.
No, it's just everyone has been so hyped about it that it has made me hyped about it. I've never played a Baldur's Gate. I've never been interested in playing a Baldur's Gate, but now everyone around me is excited, and suddenly I'm excited.
Maybe once a year there's kind of a game that approaches this, but maybe once every 2 years, where, if you're sitting looking at your Steam friends list or Discord or your PlayStation friends list, in my case, because I'm a pleb. And just, this happened with Skyrim. It was just Skyrim. Everybody on the list was playing that game, I think Breath of the Wild was pretty similar a couple of years ago. I'm trying to think of other examples of this. Red Dead Redemption, maybe. Everybody's just playing that when you look through your library of friends. So this feels like a moment in the video game space.
And if we're being honest, I can't think of the last time that like a Western computer RPG dominated media like this. I mean, Witcher 3, maybe?
Yeah.
That was 2015. That was kind of a while ago.
Now that you mention that, yes. He brought it up.
You know who else
James
is
hates Witcher Watch?
Yeah. You know who else is excited about this? Hasbro.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Do you think that Baldur's Gate 3 will be more profitable for them than Honor Among Thieves?
That's a good question, and let me answer that for you. In the words of Chris Cox, the CEO of Hasbro. And just to put a financial perspective on this, we will likely make more money on Baldur's Gate 3 than we have made on all of our film licensing for the last 5 to 10 years combined.
That so wasn't even a plant.
How were you just prepared with that?
God.
I have a friend who does this for me.
And I'm going to be honest, it kind of, Baldur's Gate 3 and Honor Among Thieves kind of inversed my expectations, where I remember talking with Shawn, I think, on Mastering Dungeons, saying like, Honor Among Thieves is going to be huge. It's going to like be a Marvel level kind of movie for D&D. Mario movie, whatever, that'll be crap. And then it kind of, like, it did fine. People enjoy it, but it definitely, the pot simmered on it. It didn't boil. And I thought the opposite for this, because Larian's games previously were popular, make no mistake. People loved, was it, I always get a couple
Divinity.
of them
Divinity original
Divinity, sin. Okay. I always get that confused with Pillars of Eternity, because they're kind of similar isometric fantasy games. But, they were popular enough. People bought them, but they weren't, flying off store shelves. So I thought Baldur's Gate 3 was going to do about the same as one of those. And it is the 9th most played game on Steam, with the last record that I saw yesterday. It might have gotten higher since then, with 875,000 concurrent players, just below, I think less than 4,000 consecutive players away from Hogwarts Legacy. So I know the community would definitely love to beat that game out for the 8th spot, and also stirring up a little bit of little bit of the tall poppies in the video game industry, getting a little bit of pushback.
This has been a very interesting controversy to watch, because it boils down to essentially Baldur's Gate 3 is so good that we're worried it will raise the bar for everyone else. And, on its face, that seems like a very petty complaint. But it's actually quite nuanced and multifaceted here, because Baldur's Gate 3 is a game that essentially had a 6-year development cycle, which, in my opinion, is a heinously long development cycle. It worked for this game because of some specific reasons, which is why it's so nuanced. But I think most games' dev cycles should be maybe 2 or 3 years. Sure. Doing this whole enormous thing that Baldur's Gate 3 was able to do was a really unique circumstance. Now, we shouldn't say games should be worse. Like, that's not the argument I think that we should take away from this. But it should be that not every game needs to be a 120-hour AAA experience in the way that this game is. But we look at Larian Studios in particular. They're a Northern European country. They have some, let's call them socioeconomic factors that allow studios like that to be really successful in a way that maybe an American studio might not be.
Gotcha.
Allow a game to simmer for a long time, like a good red sauce, like a good meat sauce on the stove for 6 years before it's perfect and ready to go.
Well, I also think it speaks to the success of, and I've been really critical of this model, or just not critical, but just not engaging with it myself, is that early access model of getting the game out early. Another kind of famous success story from that being Hades, which I played the finished version of earlier this year and really, really enjoyed, but did not play it at all during early access because personally I'm just like, I don't want to play a half-finished game. Like, I want to wait till the thing's done. But my understanding of how it works is that the developer gets active feedback from their community while they're developing the game and can see, they can stress test the game with the largest playtest group that they could get, which is the general public, but also have income coming in off of the game because you need to purchase it to be able to access that early access period, which might kind of buffer them out longer financially. I'm not entirely sure if that's how it works, so somebody who's more familiar with early access might be able to correct me there. But it seems like a relatively successful model from what I have seen from studios that managed to pull it off well.
I also played Hades when it was out of early access. I didn't even know about it before its early access ended. But that game kind of saved me in 2020 in the depths of lockdown. Hades is another game, another huge early access success story where players get to buy into the game and then see almost like a live service game, right? Like an MMO that gets regular updates. That's an enormous draw. And one that we see Wizards trying with dubious success to capture with the 1D&D playtest stuff, right? Where in a video game, you can take it kind of as the computer gives it to you. We have to deal with a 50-page playtest packet every month. But there's two unifying factors that link Larian and Supergiant, who made Hades, that keep them from being just like, here's an early access trend where we push out a half-baked, half-finished game. We eat up the slop, everyone. Tell us what's wrong, and we'll, cobble it together for its Christmas release. Blah. Well, and it's that Supergiant and Hades and Supergiant and Larian are both really committed to their workers and to their audience, right? They do not have Activision level shareholders breathing down their neck the entire time. Which certainly gets games on the shelves, but it doesn't get you these cultural phenomenon games, these sort of once every 5 years sort of games like Hades or BG3.
Well, I think that's the thing, right? Is if I think back to like The Witcher 3, Red Dead Redemption, I'd like to think Skyrim, although Bethesda is a little bit more of the, the typical, especially now, industry kind of company. But to quickly draw back to Xalavier Nelson Jr. Was the individual who tweeted the original tweet that started this discussion around like don't expect all games to be this good from now on, and it's setting a new standard. And I think they clarified their point was more that pouring money, talent, and time into a video game doesn't automatically equal success, because creating video games is incredibly complicated. Someone once described it to me as like, if you're making a film, you take your camera and you point it at what you want to shoot. If you're making a video game, you have to build the camera first, is essentially like the difference in the level of complexity. And yet what I see similar between Supergiant and Larian is all they did was want to make something cool. That was their priority. Let's make something that's damn cool, and let's prioritize making this thing as cool and interesting as we can make it as an artistic production, rather than how do we figure out how to monetize this thing in the most effective way possible. Maybe that strategy being the early access model. I don't know, but
it shocks me that this happened because of their relationship with Wizards, because having that kind of licensor agreement really makes this sort of thing hard. Your licensor can say, we need this. We need this on store shelves. And,
Sure.
if you're the licensee, then it's like, okay. And you can see that in Baldur's Gate 3, right? There's a lot of references to Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus, which itself became kind of Baldur's Gate-ified to pair with the Larian game. And that module came out 4 years ago. And Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't really explain the Descent into Avernus stuff, at least as far as, the playthrough stuff that I've watched has done. So you can tell there was some, licensee intermix happening here. But for one reason or another, Wizards did not rush Larian into bringing the game to store shelves, perhaps because of how successful their early access was. And they wanted to see it brought to fruition because the early access was already doing gangbusters.
Speaking of things that are doing gangbusters, or speaking of developing things early, switching from talking about video games to talking about board games, a little bit of Ghostfire gaming news. Aberration, the board game, which we've been loosely teasing since January, has finally made its way to GameFound. It is launching in late September, but if you want to go follow the page, Hannah, I'm sure, will be with a link into the Twitch chat any second now. But it's a cool game. Shawn, you have played early versions of Aberration when it was in playtest. What did you think?
I loved it. It hit all the notes that I wanted to have in this game. I had no hand in the actual development of the rules. I was consulted with lore from Etheris and from Grim Hollow with monsters and locations, but in terms of the mechanics, but Peter Lee is the person that we tapped to design this. So if you've heard of a little game called Lords of Waterdeep, or a little game called Tyrants of the Underdark, or a little game called D&D or Magic the Gathering, then you know Peter's work. So you can count on it being well designed. And I have to admit that the playtest I did, it was about midnight my time. So details are a bit fuzzy, but I know I kicked butt and I enjoyed it.
No, perfect time. Wait till the sun goes down and
Exactly.
the owls are out. I don't know if there's owls in your area.
Yes.
For folks that don't know, if this is the first you're hearing about it, Aberration is a tower defense game where it's set in Grim Hollow, which is Ghostfire's flagship dark fantasy setting, and the great beast has wandered through the forest, through the wilderness, close to a village, causing all sorts of aberrant monsters and mutants to wander out of the forest and try to assail a village. And you play, it's a cooperative game, playing as one of four defenders of the village who have to try keep the darkness at bay, somewhat literally, as one of the mechanics is using fire to kind of dispel shadows so that you can see what it is you're fighting, rally the villagers, get them to there's worker placement elements to it, trying to get the villagers to help you out, gaining new resources, weapons and equipment and things like that. And it is super cool. I actually haven't gotten to play it yet because every time someone in the office is like, let's do a play of Aberration, I'm like, I have to write a script or whatever I'm doing instead. But it looks really exciting. I'm really keen to finally sink my teeth into it. So GameFound page, link in the Twitch chat. It'll be below or over there somewhere if you want to go check it out. And speaking of things that are coming in the future, D&D Playtest 5 survey results are in. Jeremy Crawford sat down with Todd Kenrick to talk about it. As they do, I feel like they've got to be running out of rooms in the Wizards offices to be shooting these videos, right? Because they've really started to shake up their locations. And two people actually walked into the background of this video and were like, ooh, they're filming a video. It was hilarious. It was great. Go look for that specific bit. Any thoughts on the feedback to this? Did anybody watch the video? Dael is muted.
The high-level overview, from what I took out of this, it seemed like most of what they were saying was anything that we reduced the power that the characters would have, the players did not like. So we're reverting back to 2014. Anything that added options or power to the characters, the players liked, and therefore we will be moving forward with that, which is okay, but it goes back to a fear I had at the beginning of this process, which is rather than new additions, raising the fields and starting from scratch, including power levels, we are now going to take all the power that was there in this edition and just add to it, which may be fine, but it's something that I fear a bit.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, my takeaway wasn't, I hadn't noted as much with the power level, but certainly with the change, you know, something that's changed. If it's not liked, then it's walked back to virtually what it was before, which is starting to, you know, this process. We were so excited for it a year ago. It feels like it was like, yeah, we're going to be included, and they're asking the community what they think, and it is starting to feel a little designed by committee with the largest committee they can find, which is the community. But I'm also wondering if there is a certain bias going into the feedback that they're getting from the most engaged players of the game who not just like things to be more powerful, but like things the way they like things. You know, Dael, what is going on? We got like colored bars for a second there. Are you installing old alien technology into your computer? Yeah, that bit's weird. Yeah, okay.
Oh, she's been abducted. Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
Let's gaze at the peaceful serenity of the deep forest instead of worrying about this.
I agree. And part of me is actually happy with this. The part that it has trepidation is there, but part of me is like, we weren't ready for a new edition anyway. Sure. And if they were doing this for the 50th anniversary of D&D, then why not just put out something to celebrate the 50th anniversary of D&D and leave the rules that are fine with most people alone? And maybe that's what we're going to end up with. After all of this Durman Strong of chaos, of all that could be, we'll end up with what should have been, which is, hey, let's continue with 5e and see what we can do with a rule set that's pretty good, and we can still adjust based on whatever product that we're making.
You know, Shawn, when Wizards started calling this the 5th edition rules refresh, I initially I was a little bit, had some consternation over the bad mouthfeel of that long and unwieldy phrase, but I think it's kind of the most accurate thing to what it is. They're just, they're moving the furniture around in 5th edition and maybe adding a few new things to the dining room, and that's where we'll start from again.
And I'm okay with that.
Maybe for someone who doesn't want to pay $150 for a new trio of core rule books, that's a bad thing. I can see some consternation there.
Yeah, I think I agree that like it was starting to get a little bit unwieldy having Xanathar's guide and especially Tash's guide to everything, or Cauldron of Everything, kind of adding all these ancillary rules to the core classes that were optional, but there was also maybe a better way of doing things for some of them, especially with the floating ability scores rather than having them strictly tied to your species. But it felt unwieldy. The stack of books that I had to take to games started with 3 and has ballooned out to like 5 or 6 that I need to put in a big suitcase whenever people joke that I'm moving in when I show up to run a game of D&D. So a refresh sounds good to kind of, consolidate that all back into the player's handbook and then kind of start with splat books and expansions again from there. It feels like Wizards have discovered that's what they want to do through the process of doing this playtest thing. It's been an exploration for them as well in terms of how they want to supply the audience with the new rules.
And Jeremy also did an interview with Christian Hoffer at comicbook.com where they talked about something like this. And it works out well for Wizards too, because people were getting the idea that all like Spelljammer and Planescape and Dragonlance were going to be a one and done book or a one-shot affair, and that was it. They weren't going to get anything more. And by not having to completely make a new rule set, Wizards can take their can allocate their development resources now to giving us more in-depth pieces of this multiverse that they're building and do cool things with that rather than try to do cool things with the base game. So I think in the long run, it's going to work out well for most people. Like you said, some people might be unhappy, but I think in the long run, most fans are going to be happy with a refresh rather than a new edition.
Yeah, I think that's true, especially given that we're getting so many new games anyway, as it is, between the MCDN one, Daggerheart now we've got to look at, and we'll take a look at it ourselves in a moment. But yeah, I think you're right. 5e stays as it is.
Yep.
Yeah, I tend
What
to
about
agree.
now?
Yeah!
Woo!
It's a new edition of Dael. It's a rules refresh of Dael.
That's right. A Dael refresh.
I don't remember what the question was.
Talking about the Playtest 5 survey results.
Oh, God, I don't know.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah, that's fair. We're just glad to have you here,
Dante,
Dael.
we don't need this in the final cut.
Speaking of exciting things appearing out of thin air, I missed this while I was at Gen Con itself, but have seen it in the aftermath, which is the Daggerheart Gen Con preview. And it was a pretty detailed look at this game. They showed a lot of it. There's a really comprehensive breakdown of it. Christian Hoffer, who you mentioned just before, did a great comicbook.com article that was pretty detailed about it. And there's also a really great interview with Spencer Stark on the Legends of Adventress YouTube channel that goes into detail about the game. What do we think?
We're talking about Daggerheart now?
Daggerheart.
Yes. It looks exciting. It mostly more than the game itself, which I'm sure will be well designed. I trust Spencer Stark to design us a good game, whether it's Alice is Missing or Candela Obscura or whatever. Truly, to me, the most important part about it is the cultural impact. Because I cannot imagine this game being made and not having it be the system that Critical Role decides to use for their future campaigns.
Yeah, okay.
It only makes sense from a business standpoint for Critical Role Productions to not work with another company's game system primarily, right? I don't think they'll drop D&D forever. I think D&D is still a wonderful thing. It's not like streamers stream video games they make themselves. That's not the model. But you hear about challenges that happened between CRP and Hasbro in the making of the Vox Machina animated series.
Sure.
And you can tell that, creatives have a lot of respect for each other. Sometimes, companies, when they touch, they get a little bit radioactive. You want to avoid that sort of corporate toxicity as much as possible. And so it just seems smart. But will that catapult that game? Will that catapult Daggerheart into monumental success? Is Critical Role, whatever new campaign they have, going to be strong enough to do so?
Yeah, I mean, this game seems pretty specifically designed for Critical Role in the way that it also almost seems like it's kind of going in the opposite direction to the MCDM game, where the MCDM game is trying to create robust, strategic combat. The Daggerheart game is emphasizing storytelling and how a situation makes your character kind of feel, and more more kind of floaty mechanics that might sound like a criticism. I don't intend it to, but just kind of like with the fear and the hope dice kind of creating new effects that, as far as I'm aware, feels like the GM or the players need to or have more room to create more rather than having closed effects from the dice rolls happening. Does Does any of that make sense? So it's interesting.
Yeah.
It is a quite different game from D&D, and I think quite different from what MCDM are doing as well.
Which I think is going to be interesting to see as well, because I think in terms of there's this weird like symbiotic relationship between the success of this game system and the success of Critical Role, right?
Sure.
In terms of will Critical Role continue to be as successful once it swaps to its own game system? My theory is probably yeah. And will this game become successful because it's attached? It works in both directions. But there's also this element in the background that I am kind of keeping an eye on, which is that with every new campaign from Critical Role, you see that the players are looking for things that are a little bit more advanced, a little bit more complex, right? Campaign 1, it's very choose your class, follow it through to the end. We got a tiny, tiny little dipping of the toe into multi-classing towards the end, but broadly speaking, it was, keep it simple. Second campaign, we start to mess around with, let's make some more bespoke subclasses. Let's make things that are more specific to the characters, right? Which we also got with Percy in campaign 1. But the further they go, the more each of these players becomes familiar with D&D as a system, the more they want those. In my opinion, looking from the outside, it seems like they want more complexity. We've got a lot of multi-classing now in this one, or a lot more complex subclasses being chosen in the third campaign. And it will be interesting to see how that impacts a new campaign to see whether it's like, okay, how well does this new system facilitate the kind of nuanced character choices that these players are ready to be making? Because for a little while, I think that a new jungle gym in a new system will absolutely fill that sort of void. But how long? Yeah. How long, and how well will it handle that?
I think that's a great question, because Daggerheart seems like a game that I don't think it's less crunchy necessarily than 5e, only because I don't know enough about the full system. But it definitely, as somebody pointed out in the chat, seems to be friendly towards streaming and improvising and communal storytelling, as opposed to crunchy kind of exploration of mechanics, if that makes sense.
I'm coming at it from a different angle. I agree with James that the cultural aspect of it can be just as important as the game aspect. I agree with Dael. How is the streaming going to affect the game and vice versa? Just coming straight at it from game design. I have played dozens and dozens of games that I've played once and thought this game is awesome. And then I've played it the second time and I'm like, this game is pretty cool. Then I play it the third time. I'm like, I am bored with this game now. I am ready to move on. So, questions. 1, how does a game play on repeated play? How does leveling entice people to keep coming back? Question 2, does your game suck if the DM sucks? If the game master sucks? If it is a game that requires game masters to be top-notch storytellers, how is it going to play when your game master might not be a top-notch storyteller or doesn't live up to your expectations? And I'm not trying to bring in the game has been ruined by Matt Mercer because he's so good and all other DMs are bad. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying in terms of making the game mesh with the narrative, you can try to tie mechanics to narrative, but if the game master or the players aren't able to make that jump smoothly and quickly, then your game may end up looking like a mishmash of mechanics that don't actually speak to an ongoing story.
This is the big challenge with rules light games, is because, like you said, Shawn, they become so dependent on who's running them. And I think back to the guy who's making this game, to Spencer Stark, because, I played with him for about 30 minutes before a fire alarm interrupted it at Big Bad Con last year. And you can tell just by being in the room with the guy that this is one of the best RPG storytellers out there right now. He's just a consummate improviser. He's designing a game that he would be good at running, that he wants to run. I think all game designers do that. We create the games we want to play. Otherwise, what's the point? And so it might be that the market for the game is smaller. There may be fewer people who are really good at running this game, because rules, really crunchy rules, are great scaffolding. there's something concrete that you can hang on to rather than kind of making something up on the fly. But if there is a significant population of GMs and players who don't need that scaffolding or don't want that scaffolding, I'm not trying to put any sort of like value judgment on this, right? Because it's different play styles. Then the game will succeed. And the real question that underlies that is the gaming industry mature enough to have that diverse a player base? And, having been through the past 10 years of 5th edition and seeing the meteoric rise of 5e and the RPG field kind of rising with it, I feel weirdly comfortable saying that, yeah, we're ready for this. Like, even 5 years ago, I would have been like, nope, it'll flop. It'll be a really beautiful, it will be a falling star. It will burn up on re-entry and it will look amazing while doing it. But no, I think this will catch the wind.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but I think it's a really good point that Shawn raises in terms of, like we talked last week, I think it was, about meta currencies within role-playing games and how 5e kind of provides relatively few to the players to be able to change the story. Christian Hoffer in the comicbook.com article talked about having played a game of Daggerheart with Spencer at Gen Con and found that Spencer was asking the players, what does this room look like? What does the monster look like? Really investing them and drawing them into the storytelling of the game itself. But it wasn't clear to me if that was a Spencer GM style, because you could do that with 5th edition as well, or whether that was whether that is a mechanic that is built into Daggerheart that is going to help GMs DM in that style. And if a GM prefers not to GM in that style, if a GM prefers to be like, look, this is, I want the players to react to the world that I'm creating because of, it's a horror game and I don't want them to feel like they're in control of what's happening, or whatever X reason, or the GM doesn't feel they're as good at improvising on the fly or reacting to player suggestions. They prefer to have everything written out for them ahead of time. Does this game enforce a need for communal storytelling to that level, or is that just Spencer's style of GMing? That's not clear about Daggerheart yet.
Yeah, one interesting game mechanic in it that I wanted to discuss was this idea that you make some sort of attack roll, and rather than having it just hit or miss and then you roll damage separately, there is this gate almost that corrals your damage into 4 different categories. So you either don't do any damage, you do a point of stress but nothing else, 1 point of damage, 2 points of damage, or 3 points of damage. And that's the range. It looks to be the range of which you can do damage with your attack, which is a really interesting mechanic because it can, for someone who's used to 5th edition and being a power gamer who just is worried about damage per round, that you want to say, well, I am plus 27 to hit and I can do up to 90 points of damage. Where in this game, even if you're plus 90 or plus 30 to hit, no matter how high you roll, you're still going to only be doing 3 points of damage.
Right.
And that's elegant and cool because it still could capture the power gamer who still wants to be able to roll really high, but it mitigates the amount of chaos they can bring to the game design because they're limited in the amount of damage that they're doing. Now, I'm going just based off reading the comicbook.com article, of course, so I may be way off base. But that was really interesting that was the way they decided to handle the sort of game loop in terms of combat and damage.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that power gamer is hoping, because I thought there's a whole discussion to be had here about how this game is deliberately trying to offset mental load of the maths of like adding different things together and figuring out how much damage is done and etc. And the way that damage is dealt inside of these gates seems to lean into that. I suppose what I would hope is for those power gamers, the answer is the game is balanced in such a way that it's hard to hit that highest gate of damage and deal that 3 damage or 4 damage, whatever the highest gate is, consistently. So the power gamer goal becomes not necessarily doing, the most to the decimal point, but just always being able to hit that 4th gate or 3rd gate, whatever the highest gate of damage is. Just being like, my character is built in such a way that I hit that every time unfailingly, even against a golden dragon or whatever the high level threat seems to be.
And that's why it's so ingenious, because you are still capturing that audience who wants to be the most powerful character without disrupting the game as those players sometimes do. And so I thought that was fascinating and a really cool mechanic to shoot for.
What do we think of the tactile elements of this game? There was the way the character sheet is placed. Christian kind of described it as you almost have 3 sheets that kind of Metatron together. Is that no, that's not the reference I'm thinking of, but they kind of slide together. Voltron, thank you. You have like 3 character sheets that kind of Voltron together, get tucked under each other, and then you have cards that you place over your character sheet into slots to be able to show what your character abilities are, to avoid going and flicking through a book to find the reference, which seems really interesting to me. It also seems to really, you would have to build a bespoke online solution to this. A D&D Beyond or a Nexus isn't necessarily going to work for this style of system that they've created. But how did we feel about those? Does that sound exciting?
I am excited. You're totally right, Ben, that it would require a bespoke interface. But one thing that I often find to be the single greatest draw to me to a new RPG is a good character sheet. Like, I think Numenera made me want to play it for that character sheet alone, because it's gorgeous and it looks like a piece of art and it's intricate but also usable. And I was like, I was at an RPG club in school and I was like, gotta play this game. And that may not be everyone's experience, but it's a big draw. And I think if the 21st century has taught anyone anything, it's that people respond well to intuitive interfaces. And so if this game has an intuitive interface built into it, that might be a great way to get people into the game.
Yeah, layout in general in a core rulebook, and even the order that they present information in is so important to me. It's so deep in my heart. It really, really, if I can like flip to the right page easily, makes a huge difference. If I can see the information I need quickly, makes a huge difference. And those things, and then you make it pretty. Oh, I'm a sucker. I'm a goner. I'm absolutely in. I agree 1,000,000% with James. It's such a huge, important aspect from my perspective.
Modifier tokens. That was interesting. It really seems like they're going beyond, like, the game design here. Spencer seems to have a talent for thinking outside the box a little bit in terms of like what's something that nobody's thought. Like let's not just change the maths or the dice that we're using in this game, but let's really change the form factor of this game. Like we're using tokens, we're using cards, we're using all this extra other stuff.
Yeah, you need to see it in play. You need to see how it adds to the game or detracts from the game when real, tired, befuddled, work-ridden players at the end of a long week sit down at the table and want to play. Do those pieces add to the game or detract from the game for more or less of the audience? And it might add to, like we've talked about with design and character sheets, it may add to the experience to the point where it's great. If Wizards of the Coast tries to make something where you bring your race or your ancestry and your class together and build a character sheet that way, and they sell cards, what do people shout? Oh, rip off. They're trying to make us buy extra cards for this game. Boo, boo, Wizards. Now, someone else does it, and it's genius. So it's all about the audience. It's all about, the how it comes together and plays at the table with the audience that the game has in mind.
I am tempted to say that if you make a game that relies on cards heavily, in the way that this game seems to really want you to have cards and tokens and bits and bobs, if you make those free to print at home, will people who complain about cash grab things be quieted? Part of me wants to say yes, but there's this cynical part of me that says no. If someone wants to complain about a game, they'll find any angle of attack they can, whether or not it's sensical.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how they depends on what the business model is, right? And that's what's going to be fascinating to see around this game that's so tactile. Spencer talked a lot about using creating whatever you want for your modifier tokens, using tokens from little squares from another board game, or creating something that feels bespoke and unique to your character. But like, it seems obvious that they should retail modifier tokens that they create themselves, right? So the business model of this game being so tactile in the way that it is going to be fascinating. We've seen the cover art, which is not on the front of a book, but it's on the front of a box, is what was sitting on the table in the video that I watched. So presumably this game is going to be sold in a box with the deck of cards and the rule book, however thick that happens to be. Whether it's closer to a thick board game manual than it is like a role-playing game manual will be interesting to see. What monster stat blocks, look like, how monsters play is going to be fascinating to me as someone who really enjoys that side of the game. But then how do they continue to retail this thing? Are they going to release, the expansion box and it comes with another bunch of cards for their classes and their species, or they called them, I think, heritages and communities, or lineages and communities, I believe they were called. Or are they going to do smaller boxes that are like, here's a whole bunch of new... here's a new class in a small box, and it's just like a $20 purchase. That's going to be fascinating to see how they retail it and package it in that way.
It's also worth noting, I mean, even on the level of just dice, right? We already see this kind of a model work quite well, where it's like, yeah, you can play this game with whatever set of polyhedral dice you have at home, although I suppose I should point out that not every household has a set of polyhedral dice. But it's you could use whatever dice you have at home, but also we at Paizo have created a special set of dice that are specific to this campaign. Do you want the Curse of the Crimson Throne dice? Well, here they are. Get them while they're hot. You know what I mean? Like you can have your specialty sort of official sort of knickknacks. And I think as long as it is something that the player base has a reasonable chance of having just sort of a boring old average version of their own at home, or having access to it, like printing them, as was mentioned, I think broadly it's something that people are used to seeing. So I don't think it would be an off-putting sort of merchandising model to see at all.
I don't want them to sell class expansions for the sole reason of I had that idea first when I was thinking of a deck building based TTRPG, and I want to do that. Don't you take this from me, Spencer Stark.
I just think it's so funny the way that this all works, because I've been futzing around with the concept of a deck building tabletop RPG as well, and it's just funny seeing everything at the same time be like, okay, well, here we go, cards.
yeah. They're the new hotness. They're the new dice. Everybody's gonna
just got to accept
cards.
it. It's sheep rolling over grates, man.
It took 20 years, but finally dice have been supplanted by cards.
We got there. We did it, everyone. This will be fascinating to see. They didn't mention any sort of release date or release window or anything for this, did they? They said, I think we'll be seeing more of Daggerheart within the next year, was the vague kind of thing I remember seeing, but nobody remembers differently. Nobody remembers differently, so let us move on. Speaking of remembering things differently, Dropout is back in production because Sam Reich remembered differently whether his contract with SAG-AFTRA had been nullified or not, and it turned out it hadn't. There
Just
you
so
go.
you know,
There's
his name is pronounced Reich, and I think he would prefer it be said that way.
I am so glad you've corrected me because I did wonder. I did
Yeah.
wonder with this specific name. Sam Reich. SAG-AFTRA have greenlit them, saying that their kind of specific contract was never struck by the union in the first place. So they're able to jump straight back into production. And also that this is a partly strategic choice on behalf of the unions, believing that putting smaller streamers back into production and providing entertainment for the people will put more pressure on the larger streamers to make a deal sooner. And that Dropout continues to stand in solidarity with the union and has donated up to $20,000 to the Entertainment Community Fund, which is keeping currently striking performers housed and fed, I believe. The important things. Yay!
Yay.
Yeah.
Those guys
Yay.
rock. Those guys
Great.
rock. Good for them.
Look forward to seeing more Dropout content coming. And then last but not least, rounding this out with a question from Gethin. Dael Kingsmill, if somebody wanted to email the podcast, where would they send an email to?
They would send it to podcast@ghostfiregaming.com.
Perfect. Got it in one, which is where Gethin sent this question to kind of round out the kind of Gen Con couple of weeks that we've been having here on the Lorecast. Gethin asking, how do you make the most out of a convention, especially from an industry side of things? How do you meet new people, meet the right people within the industry for what you're trying to do, discover new games, learn new design skills, make connections? That being Gethin's question, me just kind of slight addendum also how to make the most out of a convention from a fan perspective if you're going to for the first time to a Gen Con or a PAX. But answering Gethin's part of the question first.
I don't know how good my answer to this question is because I have learned over the years that maybe my approach to industry mixers is slightly different than, I don't know, is expected. I don't know. I went to like an explicitly sort of schmoozing gathering. What do they call it when you don't call it schmoozing?
Networking.
Networking. There it is. There's the word. There's the buzzword. I went to an explicitly networking event, and the person who organized it was like, and you should talk to them if you want to do this, and you should talk. I was like, oh, that's not really what I do. My approach has always been one that lives largely on social media. Go to stuff, talk to people like a human. You will make friends. When you have an enjoyable conversation with someone, later on, track them down on Twitter, add them on Twitter, and then you'll end up just occasionally talking to each other because that's how acquaintances work. And over time, you form friendships and you figure out the people that you would like to work with. And it's just kind of, I don't know, just talk to people. I promise it's not as scary as it sounds.
As a nerd who has gone from being terrible at socializing to being okay at socializing, it is a skill and you will develop it. I think the con-specific answer to this one, because you can, the networking happens anywhere in any industry. For gaming in particular, I have found that the hotel bar is a good place to be.
Okay.
Whatever con you're at, sometimes the bar is in the convention center itself. It was that way for Origins, and that was neat. The bar was huge there. This is often kind of leveled as a criticism against gaming cons, where networking and industry success are paired inexorably with alcohol. And that can be a barrier for entry for people, whether they don't drink or whether, they are people who do not feel safe in an environment where there's a lot of alcohol. That's a real issue. But if you can overcome those barriers to entry, the hotel bar is a great way to just kind of meet people where everyone is a little bit relaxed. It's the end of the day. Right. People are drinking. It's chill. If it's chill.
I will say, why are you going? And based on that answer, you will then answer your own question. Are you going to become a game designer? Well, the first thing you want to do is play games, run games, talk to people who make games. At certain conventions, Gen Con is its own beast, but at certain conventions, at GameholeCon, you can sign up and play games with the people who create the game. And you can see how they run it. And you can ask them questions during the game or after the game or before the game about maybe a tip that they have for an up-and-coming game designer. By running games, we've talked about this before, by running 1,000 D&D games, you learn how different players work, and you learn why different games work and different adventures work or don't. That's one thing. Then if you want to go from learning to actually doing, you have panels that you can go to where, in many of them, you can ask questions. And afterwards, often the panelists will be willing to answer your question in more detail and share information with you. Then once you gain a little bit of knowledge, you can actually sign up to give a panel. Even if you're not a industry renowned expert, you can still give a panel on something that you love and that you think is interesting. And you will find people coming up to you and asking questions. And in the answers that you give, you will be learning things, whether you're right or wrong. You will find out quickly if you're wrong, because people will be willing to tell you, sometimes quite vociferously. But there's at large conventions like Gen Con, there's 1,000 things you can do, and none of them are necessarily wrong in the choices that you make. What are you trying to get out of this particular convention? And then, as James said, as you make friends, as you make connections, you will find doors may open that were not open before. And always carefully, but with as much enthusiasm as you can, step through those doors and see what is waiting there next for you.
Yeah.
That's the best I can say.
Yeah, and pace yourself. It is what you're saying. It's connections. It's not about headhunting. No one likes to be headhunted. So don't go to a convention with thoughts for like, I'm going to meet Matthew Mercer and I'm going to tell him about my game design. And it's good, never. That's never the approach, because that's never going to happen. Instead it is about those smaller connections, and you never know who you're going to find. You're going to find all sorts of surprising people, a lot of whom are probably at a similar level to you, who you find you're excited to work with. And then you build connections with them, they build connections with other people, and over time you have your own network. That's what it is. You're building your own network. You're not really trying to sort of shove your way into someone else's. You're building your own. And try to keep that in mind, because there will be so many people that you have never heard of that will be the most valuable connections that you can form.
That's absolutely true. I had that experience, at Gen Con just past, where it was like, I probably didn't necessarily, like, if I was to create a list of headhunting people, I gotta talk to these people. I didn't necessarily talk to all those people, but the people that I did talk to were super cool, and I've really enjoyed making those connections. And I think just 2 bits of advice that I'd throw in here is just like, be yourself, relax as much as you can, and just be genuine, talk to people genuinely, and ask questions. Don't have you heard about my game idea, or have you heard about, ask questions, but also appreciate that, like, you're nervous, they're nervous. It's an industry of geeks. It's an industry of introverts. And I had at least 2 conversations with 2 separate people where the both of us just kind of went, we've both got social anxiety. We both feel nervous as shit right now. We don't know each other. Let's get to know each other, rather than standing there in a state of anxiety, feeling paralyzed to approach or talk to anyone. Everybody's kind of having a similar experience on some level. To going and having those conversations.
If I had to boil my approach down into 3 rules to follow, it would be have fun, make friends, make a good game, in any order you choose. And nowhere in all of that does seeking out prestige or prestigious people factor into it.
If you're literally just kind of walking in off the street as well, like if you don't have any industry connections to start with, because, being in the position that I think we're all in at the moment, we have a network that gets us invited to certain gatherings or networking events, or into certain rooms that aren't necessarily immediately accessible. Back when I was just starting out, the thing that I did was find out who was running the local Adventurers League, and just started running D&D games there, and then going to stalls and just having a conversation at different stalls with people. So that's something that you can just kind of start doing. Yeah. Offer to run games. If you're in Australia, get in touch with ARC, the Australian role-playing community. They're looking for people to run games that are explicitly not Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you want to get in touch with them, get in touch with me, I suppose, via the podcast email. But,
join the
that's really good
Ghostfire Gaming
advice.
Community Discord.
Yeah.
there you go.
Justice Arman, during Gen Con, we had a lovely conversation with a father and son who I believe was the father was old school Gen Con forever guy, and it was his son's first Gen Con. We ended up in a conversation with them, and Justice was sort of explaining his path into the industry, and he was saying, you begin by, like, in his case, offering to help out at, like, the Beetle and Grimm's booth at conventions, right?
Mm-hmm.
You start working, you do a good job, you're invited back the next year. You come back, and then, eventually you get to the point where they're like, hey, you're someone we've worked with a lot. Would you like to, go out for this job position? And it becomes, over time, you have to be generous with your time in the beginning, and things will form naturally from there. It's surprising how many people you get to know just by being open to putting yourself in spaces where there are people. So even if you're right at the very beginning of that journey, you will find people who are very significant to your own path in the industry, because there is no one path, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is no one answer to how do I get in with these people. You just have to stay true to what you're doing, what your goals are, like Shawn was saying. And over time, it will happen. It will form like crystals on a string.
You would be
There's a bit of
shocked.
Science experiment.
There's a bit of ancient lore. It's floating around the internet, and when I say ancient lore, I mean from like 2016, of Chris Perkins giving a talk at the now defunct PAX South about how he got into the industry. There's a VOD of it on Twitch somewhere. I could, I could hunt it down. I've posted about it on my Twitter a couple of times because it's such an important video to me. It's just Chris talking about how he got into the industry, how he started as, lying about his age because he was too young to submit to Dragon Magazine, and, all the way up to here. And, find that video because he's a great speaker and it's a really cool talk. But essentially he says, yeah, and now all the paths that I took are gone.
Yeah.
None of them exist anymore, so you have to make it yourself, and Godspeed to you all. And like that's the sort of thing you can either find it depressing or you can find it, inspiring, and that's all on your outlook.
You would be shocked about how simple competence will be rewarded, because there is a lot of incompetence floating around, and I don't say that to be mean, but it's just when you're doing volunteer work, sometimes things give way and you have to take care of your own life, so therefore you're unable to fulfill your volunteer efforts. And it goes all the way up to freelancers being unable to deliver the correct product at the correct time under the specifications given, and this is at a professional level. So all the way up, just be competent at what you are doing, and you will likely shine a little bit more than most people.
There's a great quote in chat here from Arpeggio, quoting James Introcaso of MCDM, and also many of his own things. But the quote is, give back twice as good as you get from the community. And that is really good advice, because I also think that there is a tendency to we divvy it up, right? We say this is the industry and this is the community. And the community are the people who consume and the industry are the people who create. But that's not really how it works. We're living in an incredible I mean, it's not only a thing that comes with the digital age, but it's so much easier in the digital age, right? But it's this thing where everyone in the community is creating and everyone in the industry is consuming. It's just this big circle. We're all the community and we're all the industry. You just have to shift your mindset a little bit to keep that sort of in focus, because you really do have to give and take. It's every single one of us is doing a bit of both. We're prosumers is the term. No, I think that's some really good advice from James Introcaso as well.
The juicy SAT word. And like, ideally, you're doing that not out of some sort of sense of tactical career building, but out of a genuine sense of, wanting to give back. And I think there's a way of being strategic and being authentic at the same time. Because, if you want to build a career, you want to build a career. There's no way around it. But you don't have to be, an 80s business villain in order to do that.
It doesn't hurt, though.
And with that, sorry, Shawn, were you going to say something else?
No, just people can tell if you're not authentic. And so just be, like we said earlier, be yourself.
Speaking of being yourself, you can help us be ourselves if you are listening to this on YouTube by giving this video a like. If you're listening to it somewhere else, giving it a review helps us get out to more listeners. Send an email to podcast@ghostfiregaming.com if you want to ask us a question. We have so many at the moment, so thank you so much for everybody who's been sending them through. I will try to get through them. I apologize if we don't get through to it. Some of them are from months back, and I go back and kind of scoop them out, so your email may appear months after you've sent it, but thank you very much for listening along to this episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. I've been Ben Byrne. Here with James Hake, Shawn Merwin, Dael Kingsmill, and we will be back next week with another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. Ba-ba-da, 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 ba.
Ba-ba-da, ba.
Ba-ba-da-ba. We're like Bill and Ben, the flower button. Come on, you know Bill and Ben.
Is this from Lift Off? Is this a weird Lift Off reference?
Come